Hi class, Dr. Janachek here. So heading into week 5 now, I just wanted to go over some of your assignments. So first and foremost this week, we are beginning to talk about rhetoric. So rhetoric, as we're defining it here, is your choice of words to motivate somebody to do something, okay, to act on something based on the words you use. So traditionally rhetoric is defined as the art of persuasion, and there are different forms of rhetoric. There's visual rhetoric, textual rhetoric, digital rhetoric, etc. But for this week we're focusing really on textual rhetoric, so your specific choice of words to get somebody to do something that you want them to do, right? Persuade them to believe a certain way and to change their actions or take an action based on those changes in beliefs. So your discussion forum post for this week, it asks you to choose one prompt. So there's 3 options and you only pick one. You're going to pick one prompt and use that prompt as a means of exploring rhetoric. So either, when you've used a specific choice of words to successfully motivate somebody to do something, when somebody has chosen a specific pattern of words to get you to do something, or you can choose to analyze the word choice of Republicans versus Democrats. And regardless of which prompt you choose, you're also going to reflect on how a use of different words might have changed the situation. So we're really focusing on, how much word choice matters. Okay, so I'm also uploading a handout in this announcement on the rhetorical situation. And so rhetoric involves really 3 aspects. You consider your audience, you consider the rhetor or the person creating the message, the speaker or the writer or the artist, etc., and the text itself. So those 3 elements sort of form a triangle. And when you are analyzing a text or creating a text, regardless of where you're positioned on that triangle, you want to think about the relationship of those elements, so the unique rhetorical situation that presents itself in that instance. And you also want to think about things like medium. Why did the writer choose that specific medium? Or if you're creating the text, why that medium mattered, and then context. So what's the context surrounding the text itself, the creation of the text. So, and this week we're thinking about the text itself, the words that are being used in the message, and audience. So why it matters for that specific audience, and the rhetor too. So why is the rhetor choosing these specific words for that specific audience? Okay, so thinking about those elements of the rhetorical situation, and in the discussion forum. And then you're also going to be, one more note. So the initial post is due Saturday, but then for the 2 response posts that are due Tuesday, you need at least 150 word response posts. Okay, so that's 50 words longer than, I believe, than your response posts have traditionally been so far. So just note that 150 words per response post this week. Okay, so this week you're also revising your paper 2. So 2 weeks ago you wrote your paper 2 on, defining what a discourse community is, summarizing that definition using Swales' article, and then talking about 3 communities that you believe are discourse communities based on those 6 criteria that John Swales gives. Okay, so you're revising that paper for this week. However, it's not like you're just polishing that paper directly in response to my comments and your peers' comments and then turning it in. You're going to have to do some revision this week as well, because it's not the same exact prompt. So yes, you're still talking about discourse communities. Yes, you're still going to have to define what a discourse community is. And yes, the feedback is still going to be relevant regardless of which of those 3 communities you pick. But this week you are, for this paper, the revised version, you're picking one of those discourse communities and you are approaching this as a persuasive paper. Okay, so it's not an informative paper anymore where you're just explaining 3 different discourse communities of which you're a part. You're instead writing this for a friend who is suspicious of, whether or not that discourse community you're writing about is in fact a discourse community. Okay, so you're taking the stance that this person probably doesn't agree that what you're talking about is in fact a discourse community. And then you're working in that paper to convince them that it is in fact a discourse community. One of the things to note is you have to use all 6 criteria from Swales's article. Okay, so it's not like you can just pick 2 and say because it fits these 2, it's a discourse community. Wrong. For something to be a discourse community, it has to fit all 6 characteristics. Because as Swales notes in the paper, just because a group has a common interest or ways of talking to each other doesn't make it a discourse community. Okay, there are specific requirements that distinguish a discourse community from just a community. So a discourse community differs from a community because its goal, it's not just about people coming together and sharing stuff. It's much more. It's about the production and exchange of knowledge about a common interest topic. Okay, so that's why when some of you guys have written about your family as a discourse community, and I'm a little bit suspect of qualifying a family as a discourse community, and so if you want to convince somebody who maybe doesn't agree with you, that would be maybe an interesting angle to pick, because I personally don't think a family can be a discourse community. So you can choose me as your audience and convince me away that I am wrong and that a family meets the requirements of discourse community, that your family meets the requirements of a discourse community. Here's why I'm a little bit suspect of counting a family as a discourse community. I'm going to go through the 6 criteria that Swales gives and talk a little bit more about them just so that we're all on the same page about what each of these is. So first he says commonality of interest, or communality of interest, but that's a little archaic, really, commonality of interest. So the group, and this, everybody got this one, the group shares a common interest. So, a family might share a common interest if the family is built around God, or there might be a group of Shakespeare scholars who all really share this big interest in Shakespeare. So there's got to be a common interest there. Number 2, mechanisms for intercommunication between members. Okay, so there has to be ways that the members share information with each other. So whether emails or text messages or listservs for like a scholarly community, letters, there has to be a agreed upon way that people in this group share information. 3, survival by providing information and feedback. So a lot of you guys left this one off entirely, and it's different than just the fact that there are mechanisms for intercommunication. So for a discourse community to survive, it has to have feedback and produce new knowledge. Okay, so there has to be some sort of way that this discourse community is sort of revising itself and restructuring itself in response to feedback from the different members, or outside feedback, but usually really internal feedback. And then also producing new knowledge and growing as a result. So that's the 3rd requirement. The 4th is development of genre-specific discoursal expectations. So again, this one sort of, for many of you, blended in with the creation of terminology, and it's different. So you have established mechanisms for intercommunication, like email or text messages or listservs, etc. If you're a business person, you'll use email, phone calls, you might use like a business chat, you might have like reports that you need to do for your company, etc. So within that discourse community, then, there should be known ways of formatting and creating content in those genres, in those means of communicating with each other. So for instance, in a business email, there should be a known way of structuring a business email. Okay, and I'll give you a hint. It's not, hey, first name. That's not a professional means of communication. Eradicate that from your means of communicating with other professionals, and definitely from instructors and professors. Okay, it should be like, dear so-and-so, or good afternoon so-and-so, etc. So agreed upon ways of interacting in those genres. There's like a business proposal. There's specific contents that should be in a business proposal. Those are agreed upon characteristics for that genre. Okay, so you'll want to think about if you can find like a specific example. So for a family, what would be a genre that a family sort of creates or interacts with? Maybe you guys exchange information through, a Bible study, but where is that, written communication or, specific format that needs to be, coming out of that exchange? Do you guys have a specific format? Or maybe you could argue maybe prayer, but are there specific times or specific formats, specific content in your prayers, etc.? So you'll want to think more about genre and how you have specific expectations for interacting in those genres that are unique to your discourse community, or at least relevant if not unique. Okay, so 5, all of you guys got this: possession of an embedded dynamic toward an increasingly shared and specialized terminology. Okay, so what words do you guys know as, members of that discourse community that maybe people outside might not know the full meaning of or might not be able to appreciate as much? So sort of like jargon, but it doesn't have to be technical. So a number of you guys, referenced like, Christian words that, non-Christians might not understand, or even people outside of your denomination might not understand the meaning of, and that works. 6, a critical mass of members with a suitable degree of relevant discoursal and content expertise. Okay, so this doesn't mean just like one professor in a class, or, you want to think about if you're applying this to the family. So who are the critical mass of members with content expertise? So remember, it's not just like people are older and wiser, like, grandparents or parents, etc. Like, discourse communities are about producing information. They're about producing knowledge around a topic. Okay, so if you're trying to argue that your family is a discourse community, what is that shared knowledge you're trying to produce? What are those genres that you're working within? And who are the experts on that content? Okay, so if you're going to convince somebody who doesn't agree with you, those are things you'll want to take into consideration. All right, so remember for this paper, you're focusing only on one discourse community. Okay, so you will need to still define what a discourse community is for somebody who does not know what a discourse community is. Okay, so make sure you give a good definition. You summarize, paraphrase it, give in-text citations, and then, your paper that you're going to develop is on that one specific discourse community. Make sure to have a thesis statement at the end of your introduction, and your thesis statement should have some sort of argumentative claim, right? This is a persuasive paper about why your friend or whomever should consider this specific discourse community. You should mention it in your thesis statement, why it is a discourse community. Okay, so that thesis statement should be the takeaway of your paper, which should be, this discourse community is in fact, or this community is in fact a discourse community because X. And then your because should sort of spell out the structure of your paper, hopefully. You don't need like 6 body paragraphs and 1 paragraph for each criteria. That would be too much for a 900-word essay, but you should have some sort of sensible organizational structure there. Paper length stays the same, 900 words, but your audience is different. The content is a little bit different. You still need to use in-text citations and bibliographic citation at the end. Okay, so if you're paraphrasing Swales, or quoting anybody else, you must give in-text citations for summary, paraphrase, and direct quotation. You must use APA style or Chicago style, depending on your major. That goes for the paper formatting as well. Okay, by week 5, you guys should be using the correct paper formatting. If you're not, I'm going to start deducting more heavily for this stuff. Okay, and that affects your ethos. That affects your credibility as a writer if you're not using the proper formatting, using the right discoursal expectations. So if you guys are considering this class a discourse community, we have shared understandings of what papers should look like. Right, they should be formatted a specific way. The citation should be formatted a specific way. And that if not, your expertise is called into question then. So that's due Saturday at 11:59 p.m., this revision. Then you also have the reading quiz on the learning resources due Saturday. And then for Tuesday, you have a written assignment in which you respond to the feedback you received from myself and your peers. So just a 250-word response in which you explain how you integrated your peers' feedback and my feedback into your revision on paper 2. Okay, so what did your peers and what did I say that you found useful, and how did you make revisions accordingly? Okay, so those are the assignments for this week. I'm happy to chat with you guys if you need any clarification on anything, but hopefully we have a better understanding of what discourse communities are, how they differ from just regular communities, and we're all set on what you're doing with your second paper revision. All right, have a great day, guys.